We've been hearing a lot in the past 2 days about a new digitally enabled generation in the Middle East. Certainly, young people are a critical target for anyone trying to push the boundaries of innovation, whether in content, technology, or services. Our next speaker, Antonio Campo Dall'Orto, Executive Vice President of Music Brands for Viacom International Media Networks, where he oversees all creative and content decisions for Viacom Networks brands internationally. He's going to present a very important new study about that focuses specifically on youth in the Middle East. So please help me welcome Antonio. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me here. As has been said, I'm here to give you quite a synthetic, I hope, version of something that for us is very important. What we are going to see today is the picture of a generation that has been defined as the Millennials. This generation that we are talking to, especially with our main brand that is NTV. And for us it's very important because we strongly feel at Viacom that knowledge is a key success factor in these days. The world is becoming very complex and knowing more about the people we are talking to is much more relevant than 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The study that I'm going to briefly summarize, actually we had two different versions, one of 15 slides and one of 500 pages. We prefer to give you the 15 slides version. Has been done in 24 different countries, has been involved in 15,000 people, and for the first time is including also Egypt and Saudi, and to give us an understanding of the differences, the similarities, in this case, of the youth. So let's try first to define what is millennials and where they are in terms of the age. So these are people that are born from 81 onwards. So some people probably here also are represented as generation. And this is a very important part. They are the largest generation since the boomers. The boomers are the famous one that were born till the mid-60s. Just to give you some numbers, the boomers today in the world are 1.4 billion people. And the Generation X is 2 billion people. So this is why it's so important also the dimension. And we shouldn't think that youth, that people just as youth, but as a driving force of what is going to be our future. It's particularly interesting in this area of the world. Why? Because of this chart. Obviously, the youth will always be able to have an impact on their society. But it's very different if you live in Germany and Italy, where this age range and this target is representing 19–20% of the population, or if you live here where you represent 48% of the population. And when also you go to the absolute number, so to the actual dimension of this generation, we discover that in China they are 412 million people, in India 434 million people, in UK, that is a bigger one, in Europe is 16 only, and here in Middle East is 160 million people. So this gives you an idea of what can be the impact of this generation. So let's try to see which are the key elements that define this generation. And obviously, I will try to choose the one that differentiate them from the previous one, the Generation X. So these are people that are better educated, more self-esteemed, more demanding, and more tech-savvy. All this makes it that is a more ambitious generation than the previous one. We have chosen a tag here that is the answer to the question to determine to make the most of their life. Here you have the percentages that we got in Egypt and in Saudi. That, by the way, are higher than the overall percentage that we got at the worldwide level. It was 83%. So they want to make the most of their out of their lives. But let's see a little bit which are the elements that define this generation. And obviously, in a very necessarily simplified way, we have been isolating the key points. So it's a generation that is defined by positivity. It's a generation that is very optimistic, is very positive, and is feeling empowered about having an impact on the world that they live in. And the phrase that you see here is a very typical phrase for this generation that was going to be impossible to see it on the previous generation of what we call the Generation X. Life is amazing and full of choices. I want to make the most of it and make my parents proud. Is something that is quite different from what we saw in the past. But where does this come from? So we have isolated three different elements that are highlighted here that I'm going to briefly describe. So let's start with family ties. This is by far one of the most defining things for these millennials. Why? Because before, youth used to take a stance against their parents' generation. So it was very important for the previous generations to define themselves, I don't know, going out of home early and try to define their own personality, in some cases even against the previous generation. This is completely different because this generation is very close to their families, so close that they even choose mother or father as #1 best friend. You see here 41% in Egypt, 35% in Saudi. By the way, these numbers are higher than what we see on the rest of the world, also if they are high also in the rest of the world. Consider to this item, the previous generation, the number were normally below 5% because you didn't want to have your parents as your friends. And if you ask about who is going to be your role model, this number is even higher, so that mom and dad are always present in 70% of cases a role model. Before we had pop stars and rock stars, a musician and a sportsman. Now you have your dad and your mom. And parents have been encouraging and protecting this generation. Second point, digital natives. Digital natives is not just a matter that they use a lot of technology. By the way, they don't call it technology. We call it technology. For them, it's life. But they have learned through the years that they have the power to shape culture and share ideas. So it's not just a matter that they can interact, but that they feel that in some way they can push a button and make things happen. And this has been given them a lot of sense of empowerment and the power also to develop and portray their identity. One thing that I found interesting, again, we don't have the time to go deeper, but in half of the millennials in Saudi Arabia and Egypt say they have a different personality online than in real life. And they feel that the curated personality they have on their online version is the one that they love more. Third point, reform the world. This combination of self-confidence and empowerment makes that they have developed a very strong sense of independence. In this case, the sense of independence that you find here is a little bit lower in this region in the rest of the world, but is growing over time. And this has been helping the sense of what I said before, of possibility of changing things. By the way, when we are talking about changing things, this is a generation that is not driven by ideology, but by a pragmatic sense of reality. So they want to change their environment, their world, but they are not rebellious. They are what we say reformists. They want to make sure that the world gets better. They don't want to destroy the world like has been happening in the previous generations. Obviously, it's not all positive, and we have been asked many times, yeah, okay, but this is a picture that looks too nice. Reality is that, me too, when I saw this picture coming the first time, I think it was 7 years ago, at the beginning it was hard to believe that, no, we had such a dramatic change in generation. But after 5 years of constant and homogeneous result all over the world, we really have, I mean, now the millennials is an established element in literature all over the world. So what does it mean for a generation with this value to have been impacted by the crisis? First of all, they have been raised to believe that now they can conquer the world, but at the same time, given the environment, they have discovered that maybe they have been in some cases overprotected. This is something that comes out often in their wording, so that they have been told that they could have done everything in their life, but then in their real life sometimes they struggle. Second is that they are worried that they will not live up to their full potential. That is probably the thing that they want more in their life. Just to give you an example, to the question, are you going to earn more than your parents? Only 27% of people in the world, they answered yes. By the way, 19% in Saudi, 32% in Egypt. This is the lowest level that we have ever seen in the last 30 years. So people think that the economy are not necessarily going to be better during their lifetime. And this is why, as you can see on this chart, to the question, which is the #1 issue that you can see in your life, is not global terrorism, it's not climate change, it's not any other issue, but is unemployment, because they feel that to get their full potential, realize that they have to have a place in this world. But given all that, all we have experimented in the last 5 years has been in some way, starting from 2008 and 2009 crisis, it has been like a big stress test to their positive attitude. But this chart, you can see here, is giving us a sense that we should never confuse what is the fundament of their values and what is the economical cycle. So this generation, even after all these difficulties, remains the most positive generation that we have been knowing the last decades. The number that you see on the right side of the chart that says that I won't settle for anything less than what makes me happy, or I always try to be positive, 92%, 91% is much higher than what we saw in the previous years. And again, in this region is even higher than the average of the world. So why can that happen? Is because they are very adaptable. So this is a generation that is different from us and is really living the spirit of the time, being able to live inside a world that is always changing. I mean, there is what we call the super now element, so the fact that everything is about the present, everything is about instant gratification, but this allows you to adapt yourself to what the world around you is suggesting. And this is why, and this I think is a nice chart, they have cancelled one word from their vocabulary, that is failure. This generation doesn't feel that there exists failure, because they always say that there is never a failure, but always a lesson. So they try to do things, they can make mistakes, and then they do something else. And I think this is very clearly also coming from the video game kind of narratives. And there is also in this case a lot of literature about how psychologies now are shaped by video games, because in video games you have to go from one place to another. You learn from the experience, and if you don't find the way that is the A way, then you will find the B one. And as you can see here, they have been able to remain very conscious of their possibilities, no matter what the environment is suggesting them. Obviously, trying to summarize everything in a few pages is not simple. So I've been trying to use videos, given that the video is much more contemporary media than words, if I mind, to try to synthesize what they are and what they represent. So try to give you a sense of what is going to be in front of us in the next years for what concerns the young generation. So here is a video that is talking about the millennials.
Millennials are the first digital generation. Born from 1981, they are almost 2.5 billion in number, making up 34% of the world's population. Part of a globally connected ecosystem, millennials in every country have convergent values, habits, and ways of thinking. But they are not a tribe. Style, self-expression, and personal interests are becoming more and more varied. They are reformers, curious and passionate, culturally prepared and socially responsible. They live in the present, but they are focused on the future. Authenticity is not negotiable. They reject hypocrisy, and they don't compromise. The strength and positivity of the millennial generation is the result of three main factors: their confidence and command of new technologies, the love and protection offered by their families, and their wit and sense of humor, which prove to be powerful problem-solving tools. The super now defines millennials. Multitasking, sharing, and immediacy are key words to understand them. Social media goes far beyond just using Facebook and Twitter. Continuous connection and interaction have created a new collective force and have changed the way we do things forever. Raised in more cosmopolitan communities than their older siblings, they face life's challenges as they would a game. Those who are smart and competent know how to play the system and overcome obstacles. This is manifest in the workplace, where millennials expect recognition and continuous validation. The word failure is not in their vocabulary. They recalibrate their objectives as necessary. Millennials are the driving force for economic and social change. They have already redefined rules. We and our companies are in their hands. They are the next generation of consumers and workers. Understanding millennials means better understanding our future.
The last phrase, understanding millennials is a way to better understand our future, is what I was trying to say at the beginning about knowledge and how important it is for our company knowledge. And normally, also inside our company, when we introduced this a few years ago, the first reaction, as I told you, is how can this be possible? Because each person and generation tend to project themselves into the future. That can be a dramatic mistake. Once they absorb it, and we absorb it, then the second question is another irrelevant question. It is a judgment. Is this good or bad for the world? At the end, this is the change. So we can look at it through that filter, or we can just do something different. It is to try to understand the impact of these people and this generation to the world. And there is no doubt, as I said before, that the way they have been growing and that they have been interacting between themselves, and they are ready to work in the workforce or trying to get information to do creativity or probably to do also industry in the future. There was an interesting, I think, document inside The Economist a couple of months ago about the new millennium way to do business in the future. I think that they are going to redefine the world, even more in places where they are 48% of the population. A little less in Europe because they are not so many. But as a final thought, I choose this phrase that is, with the premise of all the values that they have, is if I want to do something, no one is going to stop me. That is true for 69% of people in Egypt and 65% in Saudi, and in this case is very similar to every single place in the world. But this doesn't want to sound as a threat to the rest of the generation, because this is a generation that have a very sound and positive value about the future, so that this phrase in their mind wants to sound as a hope for a better world for our future. Thank you very much.